Hi, I'm Tessa, and welcome to Little Lady Homestead. So behind me, I have 43 little baby chicks. They are only 4 days old currently, and this is my third year in raising chicks, so I thought it was a great time to sit down and talk about if you want to start raising your own chicks, how you do it from the time that you get them around maybe even 1 to 2 or 3 days old, up until the time they're ready to go outside. So there are a few things that I wanted to talk about that you'll need to figure out before you even get your chicks. And the first one is whether you want to buy them from a hatchery online or whether you want to buy them in a store locally. And maybe not everybody realizes that you can buy them online from a hatchery, but there are some pros and cons to each one. And getting them from a local feed store is really convenient because you can just go there locally and pick them up and bring them home. But you won't get that much of a variety of different breeds available. But they usually do have the most common breeds and some of the best breeds as well. I commonly see Buff Orpingtons and Barred Rocks and New Hampshire Reds and the ISA Browns or the Red Stars. So those are commonly in your feed stores. You can also ask your feed store if they can get them delivered there for you, so that might be an option. But generally the variety of different breeds available is smaller if you go to your local feed store. But if you have your heart set on specific breeds, then looking at a hatchery online might be for you because there are just an immense amount of breeds that you could choose from, and certain hatcheries might specialize in certain ones and might have been breeding them for a long time. Also online, you have the option of choosing whether you want a sexed male, a sexed female, or if you want to just do a straight run, which means that they're not sexed. You have a 50-50 chance basically of getting a male or female. So if you are sure that you just want females to lay eggs, you don't need a rooster, then going from a hatchery might be your best bet because not every time in your feed store are they sexed, and it might just say straight run, and then you run a gamble whether you're getting males or females. So the benefit of getting them online, again, is that you have more variety of breeds and it's more certain that you're going to get the sex that you want. Sometimes ones slip through the cracks. Maybe you bought 5 hens and one of them ends up being a rooster, but that doesn't happen that often. It's a lot more common that you'll get what you want if you get them sexed online rather than getting a straight run in the store. One thing to keep in mind as well when you're shopping for chicks is that I do recommend to get all of your chicks that are the same age. So all of these chicks behind me are the same breed. They were hatched on the same date, except for one. There's one little white crested Polish chicken in there, but he is the same age as the rest of the chicks in there. Now these chicks are Cornish crosses, so they are going to grow at a much, much faster rate than that Polish chicken. So I'm actually a little bit worried because I like to have them the same age so that they're continually the same size. That didn't happen in this case, and it seems like he's doing just fine. But what I wouldn't recommend is getting a batch of chicks and then 2 weeks later getting another batch of chicks, because there is a bigger chance that the bigger chicks can bully the smaller ones or maybe take up more of the food. So I do recommend getting them all at the same time. And when you are ordering chicks from a hatchery, then you can get as many different breeds as you want that they have available, and they will figure out the hatching date where the chicks are all hatching on the same date so they can ship together and be raised together. Now, one downside of buying from a hatchery is that usually there are shipping fees. Not every time. I think the last order that I made from McMurray Hatchery, there was free shipping, but keep in mind, especially if you're ordering just a few chicks, then there might be a shipping charge and even a small order surcharge. So shipping can be as expensive as $50. So keep that in mind. I always look at it in my cart, not just the price per chick, but the total price in my cart to see what those shipping charges might be. We got a delivery this morning. I picked these guys up at the post office.
Hi, sweeties.
So you can choose what works best for you. What I do recommend overall is to not make a purchase on a whim if you're in Rural King, which I've done before, and you hear chicks and you say, oh, I should really get some chicks, and you bring them home without having everything set up for them. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. If you want to get your chicks and you have an idea of when you're going to get them, what do you need for them? So the first thing that you're going to need for your chicks is a brooder. And a brooder is any kind of containment for them to keep them contained, but also keep predators or potential predators away from them. And I had this space in my garage where I just built these brooder boxes. And I have two of them actually. I have turkeys up here, which you can't see. But these fit perfectly in these wire storage racks that I already had in my garage. I didn't want to take up any more floor space in our garage, and we had this space. So I built it to size here. Also, it's big enough. That is something that you need to consider when you are creating your brooder box, is you need to have enough space for the number of chicks that you want to get. So each chick should have a half square foot approximately of space. And right now, I have 40 chicks in this brooder, and this is only 12 square feet, so really I should only have 24. But the turkeys that are in the brooder above it, the brooder is identical. It is also 12 square feet. They will be outside by the time these guys get bigger. So what I'll do is I'll split it up, so 20 will be down here and 20 will be up there, and then they'll have a little bit more space. But when they're so tiny, they really don't need that much space. So they're all hanging out down here together. So I have 42 chicks in here, and you are probably not going to get 42 chicks unless you're doing meat birds like me, or maybe you want to go 0 to 60 on starting your laying flock. For my chickens, my laying chickens, I started out with 4 chickens, just 4, and you can put them in a small box. You can put them in a storage tote. I've even put them in dog crates. That's what I did for my first group of chickens. And I cut some cardboard boxes so that I had long pieces that were about 6 inches tall, so I could line the sides of that dog crate. That way they couldn't get through the gaps in the wires and their bedding wouldn't fall out and make a mess. So you can really get creative. Whatever you have available that is big enough for the number of chicks that you have, you can use it. Anything that, like I said, keeps them contained and keeps predators from getting them. Now, predators you might not think that you really have to worry about, but anything like a cat or a dog or even your kids, you want to make sure that they are secure inside, that nothing is going to get in there. Even if they're in your garage, if mice or rats can get to them, you want to make sure that it's secure. So on here I have hardware cloth and chicken wire. Just to make sure that, like I said, not only they are kept in, but any predators or my kids won't get in there without me knowing. So another thing about a brooder, you want to make sure that it is well ventilated, and I have plenty of ventilation in mine because it has open sides. But even if it had closed sides, it would need to have an open top, and I have lids for mine, which it's just wood with chicken wire on the bottom. If you have a lid, you can't just close a regular storage tote lid on top of it because they won't have enough air and it won't be ventilated enough to keep them healthy. Their poop has a lot of nitrogen in it and it can be quite noxious and have a lot of fumes in it, so you need to make sure that your litter is sufficient and it has enough ventilation to keep them healthy. So talking about litter, I'm using pine shavings in mine, but also you can use paper towels, especially when they're really little itty bitty ones. One thing that I wouldn't recommend is using newspaper because it can be slippery and it can actually hurt their legs and they can get splay leg. Just make sure that whatever is in their bedding is really absorbent. It doesn't have a lot of fumes like cedar shavings do, and it's not going to be slippery. So for my bedding, I have it about maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. That way it can absorb a lot of that fecal material. And I built up my sides about 4 inches. That way it doesn't fall out of their brooder and make a big mess. And also, as it gets dirty in there, I'm just going to keep adding shavings there because it'll make a deep litter system and it will be able to control all that manure. Alright, so next I'm going to talk about heat. You can probably see that I have 2 heaters in their brooder because it's such a long space. I want to make sure that they have enough heat, but also they have the option to go to a warm spot and the option to go to a cool spot. And I never want to point my heater into a corner because I don't want them to crowd each other and potentially smother each other in a corner. So I have the lights pointing in an open area, and you can see nobody's directly underneath the light, but they're not on the ends or nowhere near the light. So I know that it's warm enough and not too hot. So you'll likely need to supplement heat for your chicks during the first 6 weeks of their life, depending on how warm it is outside. But at least for the first few weeks, you will definitely need to, because in their first week of life, they need to have an area that is around 90 to 95 degrees, and that's really warm. So you're not going to get that without having a heat lamp or a heating plate, something that will keep that area warm. And then that's their first week of life. Every week after that, you can decrease their heat by 5 degrees until they're about 6 weeks old. At 6 weeks, they can withstand temperatures around 60 to 65 degrees. So usually if you're putting them outside in the summer, then you're going to achieve that even at night, and so they won't need supplemental heat. For me, last year, I got chicks in August, and I think after about 3 or 4 weeks, it was warm enough even at night that I didn't need to have a heat lamp on them. But you can just gauge that depending on the time of year and your climate. But these guys are under heat lamps. And you can see nobody's directly under the heat lamp because it's relatively warm in here. It's maybe about 55 degrees. If I use a temperature gun, that area is between about 95 degrees and 100 degrees. And that's the reason why nobody's directly underneath it. But you can see that they're kind of around the center of that direct beam. And I think that that's a good thing. They're moving freely. They're not all bunched together like they're cold, and they're not as far away from the light as possible to indicate that they're hot. So for me, I don't change the position of the light or turn it off at any point unless I think that they don't need it at all. As long as they have enough space to get away from the light if they need to, and there is enough space under the light if they need the heat. So I have these lights, but the other option is to get a heating plate. And I really like the idea of the heating plates because it mimics a mama chicken where the chicks go underneath it to get warm. And then another positive is it does require less energy to run. I have noticed that anytime I use my heat lamps, my energy bill does go up. I can see the difference. If there's a spike in the energy bill, I think back, oh, was I using heat lamps? Yes, I was. And they do require a lot of energy. But the good thing about them is that they span the heat out over a large area. So if you have a setup like mine where it's really big, it's kind of nice because you have enough area for like 40 chicks. But if you only have 10 and you only need a small plate, then that might be your best option. However, the drawbacks to the plates is they are much more expensive, sometimes even double the price, and also they don't hold as many chicks underneath it. So for having 40 chicks, I would need at least 2 plates, maybe even 3. So probably price is the biggest thing, at least the initial purchase price is the biggest deterrent away from that because you might need more heating plates than you will the lights. But in the long term it might work out because, like I said, the energy bill in running these heat lamps is pretty high. Another thing to keep in mind with these heat lamps is they are really hot and they can even be a fire hazard. So if you are clipping them onto the side of a brooder, if it falls down into the shavings, it could start a fire because it's so hot. So mine, I have them resting on the chicken wire, so they don't have any way of falling in to the brooder. So I don't worry about that as much. And also they're far back, so that my kids don't touch them, because they are very hot to the touch and they can be a burning hazard as well. So heat is one of the most important things, but you have to be safe with it. All right, so for your chicks' food and water, they do require a special chick starter, and it does have higher protein than a normal laying chicken feed, and it doesn't have as much calcium in it. Laying chickens need a lot of calcium because they are making the eggshells for their eggs, but these little guys do not need that, especially these meat chickens, because they will not be laying eggs. So we need higher protein for them as they're growing, and usually chick starter feeds are medicated. So those are the two differences between a chick starter food and like a laying hen food. And so you will need, I just bought a big bag, and that will probably last you through the time that they are old enough to start on layer food. So for their feeders, a big cost is waste for their food. So having one of these feeders where there are little tiny holes for them to just stick their heads in and eat will reduce the amount of waste that you'll see. If you just have an open dish, which I actually do over here just because I was worried that there wasn't enough space for all of them to eat out of the red one, they get in there, like you can see, they'll even scratch the food out and you'll waste a lot. So any of these covered ones where they just can stick their heads in, they can't get poop in there, they can't scratch it out, that's the best way to go. And I usually have to refill this at least twice a day. I will probably end up making like a trough feeder for them, just because, especially these meat birds, they eat so much. So next is their water. Right now I just have one water in there. It's a gallon water, and I have to fill that up at least once a day. And like I said, when they get bigger, I'll probably double the amount of feeders and double the amount of waters as I separate them into the two different brooders. But for now, once a day is fine with me. I do add a splash of apple cider vinegar into their water just for their gut health. When you do first get them, though, it is good to put an electrolyte packet into their water. Or when you first get your chicks, it is likely that they have never eaten food or water before, because they actually absorb their yolk from the eggs that give them enough nutrition and hydration for 2 to 3 days. So having that electrolyte pack in their water is really good to help boost their hydration. So when it comes to their food, chickens actually digest their food first in their crop. Instead of having their stomachs really break down their food and having teeth to chew things down, works by using little rocks or grit inside that muscle and actually break it down, like kind of how we use our teeth. So you need to supply them with chick grit so that they can absorb all the nutrition from their food. So if you have all of these items all set up for your chicks, before you go to the store or go to the post office to pick up your chicks from the hatchery, you need to make sure that their water is full, their food is full, and the heat lamps or heat plates are turned on. It might take up to an hour to get their area heated up, so you want to make sure that it's already warm for them before they get here, because they're going to be cold. And so you want to make sure that you can have them taken care of as soon as they get home. So when you first get your chicks, which is so exciting, the first thing that you're going to need to do is show them where their water is. If you're getting them from a hatchery online, they never had a drink of water before, and they don't even know how to drink. And so you need to grab them and very gently dip their beak into their water. You want to make sure that you don't dunk their nose underneath there, the little holes on top of their beaks, but you want to make sure that they get a nice big gulp of water. And if you can see this little guy back here, what they do is they lift their beak all the way up in the air, and you can see them swallowing. That way you know that they got a drink of water, not only to make sure that they get that hydration, but so that they know exactly where their water is and how to access it in the future. So as I'm taking each chick out of the box, I dip their beak in the water so that I know that each one knows exactly where the water is. So I do that for their water, but I don't do that for their food as well. What I usually do with their food is I will tap inside their feeder at the food. And chickens are so curious. It's no doubt that at least one will come over, running over, saying, "What do you have? What is that? I need that too." And they see my finger tapping like another chick is pecking, and they start attacking the food. And then once they do that, then another chick goes and said, "Oh, what do you have? I want that too." And they go to eat the food. So I feel like the water, I need to help them with that, but the food, I help a couple, and then everybody else will follow suit really fast. So one thing I didn't mention, as you get your chicks home, they are little tiny babies, so it is really important to wash your hands before you handle them, and it's just as important for you to wash your hands after you handle them, because they are livestock essentially. They are cute and fluffy and adorable, but they can carry salmonella, so you need to make sure that you don't bring your hands up to your face while you're working with them. You probably don't want to bring them up to your face while you're working with them, and make sure you wash your hands afterwards. So after you get your chicks all set up and they all know where their food and water is, and you have your heat lamps on, then they're pretty much good to go. But you do need to observe them. And I am the crazy chicken mom who probably checks on her chicks far more than I need to. I like having them in my garage, which is right off of my kitchen, because I can hear them, and I check on them probably like 5 or 6 times a day. And anytime I'm coming in and out of the garage, I walk past them. But at the very minimum, I check on them twice a day, because I may need to refill their food or their water. And if you only have a few chicks, then you might not need to check it as often. But even if it's not empty, they may have kicked shavings into their food or water, and you'll need to clean it out or replace it. So when they're this little, I keep their food and water down to the ground. But when they get bigger, I do like to raise it up off the ground, even with some 2x4s or something underneath there, so that they're less likely to kick up the shavings in there, and I don't have to waste as much feed and water and replace it as often. Another thing that I want to check on while I check on their food and water is to see if they look like they're too hot or cold. So again, are they all bunched up on top of each other directly underneath the heat lamp? That would indicate that they're too cold. Or are they so far away from the heat lamps and they're pressed up against the edge in the coldest spots? That would indicate that they are too hot. So you just monitor that as they get older, as the temperature in their environment changes, just to make sure that they're at the right temperature. Another thing that you'll have to keep track of is the cleanliness of their brooder. They are eating pooping machines, and it is going to get dirty pretty fast. If you're using the deep litter method, it's pretty easy to keep a hold on. I will just add more shavings on top of this. They have been in here, this is their 3rd day, and it's looking a little bit dirty. So probably tonight I'm just going to add some more shavings on top, maybe like a 1/2 inch. And then every maybe 3 to 5 days I might add a little bit more. And then when I need to replace the shavings, which hopefully I won't need to until they go outside, when I need to replace the shavings if they're in here, I would just get a dustpan and scoop it out, and then once it's all clean I would replace it, or do half at a time, because if I'm working on this half, they're all probably going to run over to the other half. If you have just a small brooder and maybe just a couple of chicks, what I used to do is I would have a little shipping box that I would put them into while I clean out their brooder and then replace them. I don't like them sleeping in their feeders, but that is pretty cute. One potentially fatal condition that you actually can treat is pasty butt. And it sounds gross, it is gross. Pasty butt is when their poop actually collects around their vent, which is where they defecate, and it can build up and block it. And so they can get sick really fast if it is blocked and they're not able to excrete their manure. And so if that happens, I usually take a look at them every day and see if any of their butts need to be cleaned. Sometimes I get away with not having to clean any of them, and that's always really nice. But if you do see one with just a blockage on the back and it's just really dirty and crusted over, then all I do is take that one out and I get a bowl of warm water. It's really important that it's warm but not burning, so it's kind of like giving a baby a bath. I make sure that it's as warm as it can be without being too hot on the inside of my wrist. And if it's really bad, I'll actually soak their bottom in the warm water for a couple minutes and then lightly massage that area with a Q-tip to break down that manure that's clung to their feathers. And that's if it's really bad. If it's not too bad, you might just be able to take the Q-tip without soaking them. So just get the Q-tip soaked in warm water and then get the manure that's stuck on them off. And you'll probably need to repeat that 1 to 2 times a day for a few days. They'll usually outgrow it. Some chicks just seem more susceptible to getting that pasty butt, and some of them do fine, but you'll want to check them every day because my chicks are 3 days old and I just observed today that some of them have pasty butts, so I'm going to have to treat them because, like I said, if you leave it, then they could die. Another thing health-wise, and this isn't really health-wise, just to give you an FYI, when chicks are sleeping, they're really sleeping, they will look like they're dead. They're like splayed out flat on the ground. And so when I look at them, even these guys back here, they don't look too bad. It's like when they're sideways and splayed out that it looks pretty scary. So it's like a human baby. You just stare at them and watch their chest rise and fall and say, okay, they're fine. But just to give you a heads up, they're probably fine. But if you do find one that passed away, that is pretty common. Usually if I have a 90% success rate with them, then that's pretty good. I started out with 43 chicks and one of them did die. So I'd say my odds are really good so far and I'm really happy. Usually the first 3 weeks are the hardest. Even the first 3 days are the hardest for them just because they're so little. But if you make it after the first 3 weeks, they're probably going to be okay. So that's basically it for raising chicks in the brooder. Now, after they get about 3, 4, 5 weeks old, they are going to get a lot of energy and this is not going to be stimulating enough for them. They're going to be flying around, they're going to be trying to roost on their water and their food, and they're going to be running around and going crazy. And that's usually the time that I like to introduce them outside. I will probably have another video later about how I introduce these guys outside, but I'm still a long way away because it is March and cold outside and they are nowhere near feathered. They're still just little fluff balls. So I have to wait for it to get warm outside. I have to wait for them to get feathers. But for now, I have 2 different brooders that I can use for them and just keep an eye on them as these tiny little babies grow. So I hope this gives you some more information. If you are interested in raising your own chicks and you want to be prepared for them before they come home, kind of what you can expect in the first few weeks and how to be prepared. I do appreciate you watching this video and I hope you stay tuned for my future videos on chickens and all the other animals that I have on my homestead. I have cows and turkeys and rabbits and goats, and I'll get pigs again this summer. But these chickens are definitely like the gateway animal to having more animals on the farm. Well, thank you so much for watching Little Lady Homestead, and I'll see you in my next video.